the fun thing about this is we do have a chance to attack the dollar system here, and minimize this chokehold that the U.S. empire has on the world. So why would we encourage the opposite when we have a chance? If the beast shows you its neck, you fucking better not miss. And right now, not only are we missing, we're like, hey, over here. Like, I'm over here with the fucking javelin. Like, look at me. And it's going to eat us, So let's not get eaten. Let's fucking stab it in the neck.
We'll get into that. So good to see you, Mark. How you doing?
Good to see you too, Danny. Great, man. Yeah, can't complain. A little under the weather, but it's nice to finally we've cut the weight here. No Peter, no Whitney. This is the show everyone wanted. So here we are. Yeah, exactly. No, yeah, super happy to be here, man. Thanks so much.
Good. I'm sick as well, so we'll try and get through this. But we're going to get into your latest piece. Has it actually dropped yet? Or when's that dropping?
It will be out tomorrow morning. So by the time the pod hits, it will be out.
But before we do that, we need to talk about strategic Bitcoin reserves. So I've only done like 12 shows or something, and it's come up in almost every one, and everyone is insanely bullish about this thing. And then we have Mark Goodwin sat on the other side of the fence. You wrote The Bitcoin Dollar, which kind of laid a bit of the groundwork for this. And so I want to get into it with you. So do you want to, I think probably a good place to start is for you to give kind of an overview, TLDR on the Bitcoin Dollar, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, totally. So it's actually kind of ironic that we're, now having discussions about like literally, the federal government becoming a hedge fund and holding Bitcoin, right? Because that was actually never the thesis of the Bitcoin Dollar. The Bitcoin Dollar was not really a direct peg in any way. It was more akin to like an analog to the petrodollar, where, there never was literally a petrodollar peg where it was like X amount of dollars for a barrel of oil. That was never the situation. The situation was, coming out of, the highly inflationary era of the early 70s when we like got off the gold standard, the Nixon shock in 71. Obviously, a lot happened before that got us there, London gold pool exploding and all this stuff. But, formally anyway, dollar leaves the bimetal standard, the gold standard in 71. And so what we do is because, the cool thing about hard money is that, it limits growth of the monetary supply because it's how much gold is coming out of the ground, 2.5% a year or whatever. That's how much your economy can grow from a monetary inflation standpoint, not like a price inflation standpoint. But we sever that tie, and then all of a sudden, we're printing a lot of money, and things are inflating, and that's the first real moment where we're seeing a lot of negative stuff from the dollar system affecting U.S. citizens. And so as a way to sort of counterbalance that, they're like, we need to find demand for treasuries. If we're going to be printing all these dollars, we need to find someone to buy, dollars to buy our country's debt. Because it's not just this simple one-to-one peg with gold anymore. So we, pretty much immediately invade, I don't know why I'm laughing, but pretty much immediately invade the Middle East and start, establishing, this de facto monopoly on the price of oil. And we say, hey, you want to industrialize, you want to buy oil, you got to buy dollars first. So we found, this artificial demand basically for U.S. debt, and that system grows and grows. And the petrodollar system, kind of encapsulates the Eurodollar system, and we start to see all these kind of offshore dollars that aren't pegged directly to, in the Eurodollar's case, to treasuries, but we're seeing this net demand for dollar-based liabilities. So the idea of the Bitcoin dollar it's the next evolution of that. So in my thesis, it's, the COVID government lockdowns are super associated with the birth of the Bitcoin dollar. So that, second week in March, we see that crazy event that, sort of infamously, oil futures go negative. And so, again, it's futures, but it's like, we're post 9/11 kids or whatever, it's like the US has just always been invading the Middle East and doing weird things there. All of a sudden we're, someone's getting paid, if futures work this way, but like $100 to grab a barrel of oil or whatever to take it away. That doesn't make any sense. And gold collapses, Bitcoin collapses. Bitcoin goes to 3.3, $100 or whatever, $3,000. And then in the next year, it 20x's. And we pull out of Afghanistan, and we begin to sort of demilitarize our presence in the Middle East. There still is one there, but less like national security interest level. And of course, we start to see a huge embracing of Bitcoin. And I think the thing that is really interesting about that is that's about 6 weeks before the next halving, which was like May of 2020. And that halving was really important because it was the first time that the relative issuance, the inflation rate of Bitcoin, fell below the target rate of the dollar at 2% and fell below gold coming out of the ground at 2.5%, 3%. So kind of mathematically, it made more sense to be in Bitcoin from a debasement standpoint than it did to be in the two other kind of commodities of or currencies of the world, the two other big store of values there in gold and the dollar. And obviously, we're creating this, new financial system. How does this tie into the dollar at all? Well, like the petrodollar, we basically create a de facto monopoly where if you want to buy Bitcoin, you got to get dollars first. Again, same with the petrodollar. It's not a literal monopoly. You could, settle in euros, and there were some other, settlement pairs at play there in the petrodollar system. But really, it was dollars. If you wanted to play with the big boys, you got to buy dollars. And we've seen that sort of replicated in the Bitcoin system through the, perpetuation of stable coins. So at the start of 2020, Tether's like not even $10 billion, I don't think. They're barely, maybe they cracked double digits, 10 billion that year. And now they're at fucking 150 plus. They're like the most profitable per.
Are they making something like $10 billion a year profit now?
Something like that. It's insane. Yeah, off of buying US debt. Interest rates are really high. So that's the other big part of the COVID, lockdowns is obviously central bank coordination. Central banks around the world bring rates to zero, if not below zero in some cases. And then, we raise rates faster than ever in history, not higher than ever. Volcker in the 80s brought us to double digits, but, we're seeing Jay Powell bring us to 5.5 basically. And, tethers of the world are able to buy these short duration T-bills, secure, U.S. debt, and make a pretty penny on these yields. And then, specifically with Tether, then they get to, just buy Bitcoin with it and kind of grow their company, invest in a whole bunch of things, buy Rumble, do whatever. But yeah, they go from being under 10 billion at the start of 2020 to now being like, a top 20 level buyer of U.S. debt from a nation state standpoint. And basically the money market, the liquidity, pair of Bitcoin has become these dollar stable coins. This, system sort of kicks off in earnest, where if you really want to play in the Bitcoin system, you gotta play with dollars. You want to, cash out serious money in the Bitcoin system. Sure, there are other pairs, but they're, the volume on them is very, very low. So we've created kind of, I think the Tether name is very funny because it's kind of literally doing what it says it's doing, and more or less tethering the dollar system and the debt-based system of the US to this, neutral, decentralized distributed asset, very similar to kind of, people have floated this Triffin dilemma thing of, how does a nation with $36 trillion in debt, pay its debt? Luke Groman, who I know you've talked to a bunch, is, points out these like kind of important metrics of when tax receipts, are no longer, paying and servicing the interest rate, or rather the servicing of the interest of the debt, and the defense budget. So, these are kind of the three big things to look at. And so right now, we're paying more to just keep the dollar alive and interest payments, just servicing the debt, than we are paying our military, and certainly way more than tax receipts that we're getting in, from citizens of the country. So the growth is really like, we have to find a place to sort of shovel, trillions of dollars of debt. Well, how do you do that? You could argue that you would create a neutral asset sort of in line with, sort of this SDR, the Bancor kind of concept of this neutral, reserve asset. And then you basically inflate into it by creating some sort of mechanism that still tethers it to US debt. So Bitcoin basically is that. It's a really good, useful tool. Sometimes I worry that my book is a cookbook and not a warning here, but we're seeing basically, the U.S. government embracing Bitcoin. Donald Trump is literally saying, we'll cut him a little crypto check. Obviously, he could mean something that's not Bitcoin, but I think, practically what would make the most sense and would be able to be actually achieve a market capitalization large enough to, give us an ability to get out from under this 36 trillion, it would have to most likely be Bitcoin. And stable coins, being the kind of way that Bitcoin scales. It's a great store of value asset. It's a great reserve asset. It really does compete with the treasury system, doesn't really compete with the dollar. It's just if, there was currency failure somewhere and billions of people wanted to come into Bitcoin tomorrow, they wouldn't be able to. There's just not enough block space. Certainly wouldn't be able to service their day-to-day transactions. Opening Lightning channels even would be a disaster at the current optionality, right? So stablecoins sort of present themselves as the natural money market to Bitcoin. So Bitcoin goes to $200 trillion or whatever, stablecoins be at, 10 to 20% of that. And now all of a sudden you got $20 trillion of demand for treasuries, and the US can sort of begin to crawl its way out. And the interesting thing there is you don't actually need to buy Bitcoin at all to do that. You can do the petrodollar analog, and the US doesn't even need to touch Bitcoin, hold it on the books at all. And they can kind of allow the through influencers, through whatever, sort of curate consent for, hey, let's scale Bitcoin with, tokenized, dollarized debt rather than, Bitcoin, which I always thought was a strange thing that, people, it seems like the Bitcoin community wants shitcoins to fail more than they want the dollar to fail, which I think is very strange, because that's what I always looked at as the big baddie here. My framework for the U.S. government is that, generally, we're really terrible to our citizens and really terrible to the citizens of the world. We're arguably, the greatest, terrorist organization in the world. And here we are, Bitcoiners having, done 14 years of let's end the Fed. Now we're here saying, please, Mr. Besant, put Bitcoin on the books. Let's mend the Fed, America, woo-hoo-hoo. Now that we got our guy in there. And it's like, well, why? Why are we doing that? Why are we encouraging it, right? Bitcoin is for enemies, sure, of course, but that doesn't mean we need to encourage and lobby our enemies to buy Bitcoin. Like, we can just not do anything to try to filter them out. Or, I've never proposed, let's kick these guys off the base layer, or, let's go find BlackRock's, address and fork it off. I've never suggested that publicly. If you want to do that, go ahead. But it's not something I've ever, as I've never perpetuated, because I understand Bitcoin is a permissionless system. You want to do taproot assets, put dollars on Bitcoin, go ahead. I can't stop you. And I wouldn't really want to implement anything that would stop you. But I don't know why we're, lobbying. Well, actually, I'm sorry. I take that back, Danny. I know why we're lobbying, because we want our fucking bags to be pumped the fuck up. That's why we're doing it. But at the expense of what? At the expense of the ability for Bitcoin to be more distributed amongst the world. Like, not that many people own Bitcoin. It is decently. It's very distributed for sure compared to most currencies, and obviously no one has the ability to print more of it on its own, which is really cool. That's what's so powerful about it. But like, most people don't own Bitcoin.
I don't even believe that, 5 million people own Bitcoin, as in self-custody Bitcoin. I don't believe it's that high.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I mean, I maybe, Lop could do a really good thread about why I'm wrong. And I hope he does, because I'd love to see the data that proves that I'm wrong. But just because unique addresses, that doesn't mean that they're separate people. There's so much congestion and centralization within, the brokers and the exchanges and whatever. And it's like, I just don't think there are actually that many people that, self-sovereignly hold Bitcoin and, would be able to transact with it if things go crazy. Bitcoin becomes very expensive. Everyone wants to use it all of a sudden. Fees go through the roof. It's like, okay, cool. You have 0.01 Bitcoin. You're going to spend how much of it to make a transaction? It's not
A lot of
really.
people own the IOUs, but I don't think that many people are on chain. But let me
Yeah,
ask you, I want to go back before we go into that stuff. So you talked about Tether there, which like them or not, they're an incredible business. Like they have done very, very well.
sure.
They're buying more treasuries than like Canada, Germany,
Yeah,
these huge nations.
totally.
But the one thing that I think is quite interesting is back when I first kind of came into Bitcoin, Tether were under so much scrutiny. Like they went through that case with, was it the New York District Attorney?
Yeah, SDNY. Yeah.
And now they seem like they're part of the crew. And I want to know what you think on that, whether there's something nefarious there, or it's just they've got so big and they provide so much demand for treasuries that they've kind of had to let them in.
Well, I think there's two answers there. One is the, conspiratorial brained, my lizard brain kind of ticks off and goes, man, what an operation to come out and, pretend that it's that you don't have the reserves and, you're this shadowy company and you're just a total, joke of, holding Chinese real estate paper and all this stuff. And then, oh shit, Howard Lutnick comes out and one of the largest primary dealers for the New York Fed is like, yeah, we have all their money. One of the most important people in the dollar system is like, no, Tether's awesome. We have all their money. So to me, I sort of, I've been blocked by Bitfinex for like years. It's like, you would think that me and Bitfinex would have like a group chat being like, oh, fuck Tether, But like, no, like he's on the total opposite. Like, I don't agree with most of the Tether truthers that say that Tether's a fraud and it's going to blow up. It's like, no, there's an innate private-public partnership that is fundamental to a company that holds this much treasuries. The U.S. government has to sell the treasuries to Tether. Like, come on, like they could choose not to sell them to Tether, or rather, maybe they're buying them from other sources, but it has to be through these dealers that are, authorized and within the regulatory regime of the government to be able to amass that much U.S. government debt. They have to be aware of your practices and have to more or less condone it because they could seize it at any point. So Tether has to play ball with the US government. You could argue where it came from if Tether, really did come out of, technologists, looking to do fun things with Bitcoin, which, there's a certain argument to be made there. But where they are now, it's like, well, yeah, they're onboarding the Secret Service and the FBI and In-Q-Tel, CIA funded chain analysis, like right onto their platform, because if the U.S. government says, hey, we heard about this Hamas thing or whatever, or, sex trafficking or whatever, or drug dealing, we're going to shut you the fuck down and seize your treasuries unless you do this, yeah, they may be one of the fastest growing companies ever, but like they are at the whim of the regulatory regime of the U.S. government because they hold 150 fucking billion dollars in U.S. government debt. But also the U.S. government needs them too. Like that's the interesting crux of this now. And so whether or not they started with the plan to do this, which I think you could absolutely make a case that they did, which I, more or less have made that case with the chain series that I did for Unlimited Hangout. Whether or not that's where it came from, where it is now, it's certainly they are like too big to fail, I think, as a net buyer of treasuries at a time when it's really hard to sell treasuries. And I think that, the stablecoin market is not going anywhere. It's about to explode, frankly. And I think we'll see trillions of dollars of highly regulated stablecoins. And there's a chance that it won't be Tether that's the winner out of all of this. I think there's a good case to be made for a, PYUSD from PayPal and Paxos coming in that's played the game maybe a little better. You could argue Tether is actually more of a tokenized liability of a company that holds T-bills rather than actually, the tokenized US debt. We've seen some issues with USDC, like when SVB went down. They lost the peg because they lost $3.3 billion, which is just ridiculous that they had it in an account like that, right? So we're going to see the stablecoin wars continue. And so whoever's the winner, I don't think it's going to be one winner. I think we're going to see Bank of America, Wells Fargo, all of these banks really move in and issue their own stable coins. But yeah, it's not going anywhere. So I think innately the private-public partnership that is capital creation, it's always been that way. Banks got to buy T-bills to create dollars and banking and checkings accounts. The dollar's been digital for a long time. this is just the current iteration of it. And Tether was, they did it the best, and they did it first, really. So quite literally did it first. So I think that's why we see the huge capitalization. But I think it's anyone's game moving forward. They obviously have a huge head start. And with like a Lutnick who owns 5% or something of the company, who holds all the T-bills, literally becoming the commerce secretary in fucking 5 days. It's like, well, they probably have a pretty good advantage here. Obviously, Brock Pierce, who founded Tether, has a huge connection with the PayPal group, which we've talked about before, but, he was their largest merchant for 3 years. He created the IGE project with them, which was like their credit card processing group. He ran a gaming fund called Clearstone Gaming out of the Idea Labs incubator, which was the first institutional investor in PayPal alongside Goldman Sachs. IGE, which was Brock's company, gets sold to Goldman Sachs. Steve Bannon becomes the CEO of the company. Bannon is obviously very connected into Trump world, PayPal with Peter Thiel. And, David Sachs is the incoming crypto czar, right? The AI crypto czar. So there's like so much regulatory goop that could absolutely see Tether, maintaining this lead. So I think we'll see. It's gonna get wild. I think Lummis said that today. Things are gonna get crazy. So who knows as Bitcoin crosses 100K back again. So stablecoins will play a huge role, both in the future of the US dollar system and obviously Bitcoin itself.
What Bitcoin did is brought to you by our lead sponsor and massive legends, Iron, the largest Nasdaq-listed Bitcoin miner using 100% renewable energy. Iron are not just powering the Bitcoin network, they're also providing cutting-edge computing resources for AI, all backed by renewable energy. We've been working with their founders, Dan and Will, for quite some time now, and have been really impressed with their values, especially their commitment to local communities and sustainable computing power. So whether you're interested in mining Bitcoin or harnessing AI compute, Iron is setting the standard. To find out more, head over to iron.com, which is IREN.com.
So, I mean, personally, I think Tether's going to be hard to beat. USDC certainly isn't going to do it. I don't know who's using USDC. It seems like that's just going to sort of be an also ran. But the thing that I want to ask you about is kind of the humanitarian side of Tether, because I understand all the broken incentives within Tether as a business, but there's lots of people that benefit massively in the global south or wherever from being able to step outside of their regime and like living within high or hyperinflation. How do you kind of balance that?
Well, I'm sympathetic to it, of course, but I think from a like user standpoint, I think stable coins are objectively a worse technology from a surveillability and seizability and programmability standpoint. Obviously, when you have your dollars in a bank, which there is dollar access to people in other ways, outside of the US. There's actually a really interesting book called The PayPal Wars by Eric Jackson, who was like an early marketing member of PayPal. And he like explains like one of his first days there of Peter Thiel kind of calling everybody in and doing this meeting. And he says, like, hey, people around the world are getting screwed by their national currencies getting debased all the time. And, what PayPal can really do is give everybody in the world the ability to move into dollars and sort of circumnavigate, control on the citizenry of, the nation state, basically. And he's kind of proposing it as this huge, like, altruistic thing. And I remember reading that being like, this is so similar to the Tether, propaganda, basically, that's like, oh no, this is such a net good. It's so good. They get dollars. It's so good. It's like, well, the fucking dollar is inflating up the ass too. It's not like this is like this great thing either. That's, people are talking out of one of their ends of their mouth saying, Bitcoin's going to $1 million tomorrow because the dollar's debasing. And then the other side of their mouth saying, it's so good we can bring the dollars to everybody in the world. It's like, well, which one is it, man? And these things are not as private as bank dollars are. You're innately giving your banking information to the bank that you decide to work with. When you use bank dollars, but that's really the only people that get access to your financial information. Private issued stablecoins on public blockchains are like the worst combo of everything because they can be seized from you and blacklisted. The FBI, Secret Service, the CIA basically via chain analysis is on all of these rails. They're literally onboarded onto Tether's, services. If they find a tweet or a thing, or, oh, hey, you bought this, part for a gun, or you did this or whatever, they could just fucking take your money. They could seize it. Now, again, they're not really doing that yet. But the fact that they have the capabilities to do that is kind of worrying. And really, this idea of unbanking the banked, it's like, or rather, excuse me, banking the unbanked. It's like, well, you're not really doing that. You're really just sort of charging a fee for them to use your bank account. In this case, Cantor Fitzgerald's account, around the U.S. New York Fed, to be able to get dollar access. And, yeah, sure, you can do some cool programmability things, do some DeFi, do some lending, whatever. I think there is something to be said about that. But the downsides of the surveillability, the seizability, the programmability, like that's what we're afraid of with the CBDC play, right? Isn't that what we're scared of? It's that. It's programmability, surveillability, and seizability. And Tether gives all of that exactly to the regulatory regime and the law enforcement, arm of the U.S. government. So are we really doing this altruistic thing by letting, citizens of Argentina and blah, blah, blah? And I've spent time in South America, right? And people love Tether. Like, they really do. Like, I sympathize for it. But I think the eventual outcome is there's going to be extreme debasement of the US dollar. Definitely it will stand up better than all local currencies, but we're just extending U.S. empire via, debt slavery. Didn't we all read Gladstein, right? Aren't we all like, hey, debt slavery bad? Why are we all cheering on, a super high velocity tokenized U.S. government debt flying around the country, or rather the world, on public rails that, a nation state level, surveillance firm can completely triangulate all of your transactions because they're published forever, on an immutable public blockchain. So I get it. I sympathize with the people that want to get out of their local currency. I think that it could be used as a tool to as a stepping stone, to get to Bitcoin or whatever, but get to Bitcoin. Because, I don't think stablecoins are really this altruistic good. I think they're just the next evolution of US dollar, which frankly has waged economic warfare across the world for decades, if not longer. And I don't want to perpetuate that system. And I certainly don't want to sell this system to, people that don't know any better. And I don't mean that in that, citizens of the world are dumber than Americans or anything, but I just mean they might not know. They're being told that it's this great thing, but they're not really being told about the downsides. So there's dollar access around. I mean, the world's been dollarized for a long time. There's other ways to get dollars. Cash is way better than stable coins. It's not even close. I know not everybody can get cash, but let's at least understand the risks and explain the risks with stable coins when we sort of evangelize the U.S. dollars, the debt of the U.S. government to the global South. I frankly think it's disgusting that we do that.
This episode is brought to you by River. There are many places to buy Bitcoin, but there's no exchange like River. They have innovative products, phone support, and a dedication to security that you just don't get elsewhere. With River, buying Bitcoin is easy. You can set up 0-fee recurring buys to automatically stack sats, and River also lets you earn daily Bitcoin interest on your cash balance that outperforms most high-yield savings accounts. With River, your Bitcoin is stored safely in multi-sig cold storage, plus you have peace of mind knowing they do monthly proof of reserves and hold all client Bitcoin that wasn't withdrawn to self-custody. Open an account for yourself or your business at river.com/WBD, which is river.com/WBD.
So I just want to get back briefly to the strategic reserve and then we'll get onto your article. Yeah. So a while ago, Thomas Packey said something to me. I've said this a load of times on the show because I think it's brilliant. He said that we're all going to be rich and depressed because the project failed. Have you been really disappointed in Bitcoiners' reaction to the strategic reserve? And do you think we're kind of giving up on the idea of freedom money just for number go up?
Yeah, totally. That's an amazing quote. He's the man. So that's beautiful. I do agree. I mean, and I wouldn't say that it's giving up on the idea of freedom money, but it's accelerating the towards the path of, limited scalability, limited onboarding, limited distribution, for what? Like we're increasing chances of ossification because now we're creating a path where, it's a national security issue that someone wants to add, a privacy tool to Bitcoin's base layer or something like that, and I don't think we'll ever really see that. But, people working on privacy tools are getting, screwed around by the regulatory regime of the US government. We have every reason to believe that will continue. Why would the US government, which is claiming, you read that BPI piece, which I think, I like a lot of the people at BPI, but it's very clear to me that that was written from a US based, this is what's good for the US, not what's good for Bitcoin. And that's their job, but I don't think that's really what we should be doing. And it really says that this is the store of value asset. It's this digital gold asset, the sort of Bitcoin standard theory. And I don't go full Bcash or anything like that. Obviously, there's a lot of issues with centralization when you raise block sizes like that. But I think we should be working on ways to not ossify Bitcoin, keep developing it, and allow the ability for more people to scale UTXO ownership. And we're just not there yet. And I don't think the scaling solution for Bitcoin should be federated side chains or stable coins on federated side chains or on Tron or whatever it might be. I don't think that that's the best way to create a new financial system for the greater good of the world. But yeah, I mean, of course, the fucking strategic Bitcoin reserve will pump our bags, and there's some cool stuff we can do with pumped bags. That's sort of the message a little bit. It's like, hey, we can exit and build with pump bags. It would be ridiculously hypocritical of me to come out here and say, how dare you want to pump your bags and be like, I can go fuck off and do anything I want and build a cool thing and do all this cool shit because I've been in Bitcoin long enough and now the bag's been pumped. I want Bitcoin to be as permissionless and as accessible as it was when I found it. And I want there to be the opportunity that I was able to take because Bitcoin changed my life. I mean, when I found it, I was working in bars, struggling with substance stuff and all this shit. And I found this thing to dig my fucking brain into. And it really did change my life in a really good way. I think there's a lot of cult propaganda bullshit that goes on in Bitcoin, but that's true. I mean, that did happen to me, and it brought me my life and my family and all of this amazing stuff. I wouldn't be having this conversation now if not for Bitcoin. It's very cool, but I want other people to have that opportunity. And when we create these basically gravity black holes for asset managers like BlackRock and frankly, terrorist organizations like the U.S. government to, get humongous amounts of Bitcoin, we're just quite literally limiting the amount. It's a finite asset. So if we give, 5% of the supply to the U.S. government, we're capturing 5% of the supply that could be distributed. Would that 5% probably be bought up by Michael Saylor? Yes. But we should be distributing this stuff. It really doesn't work unless we distributed it out. There needs to be innately, in a monetary system, it can't be equally distributed. That's a thing that is just an oxymoron of a financial system. You need to be able to express volatility between parties in this transactional settlement. So someone is going to have more than the other at the end of a transaction. There's no way to create a perfectly fair UBI-based kind of distributed system. You need to have winners and losers, but who do we want to be the winner and who do we want to be the losers? Let's let the U.S. government wither away. Let's let this group that's really, treated the world really unfairly for an extremely long time. I'm proud to be an American in a lot of ways. I think American culture is cool. I'm glad I can go on a podcast and say all of these things and have constitutional protection that I won't get thrown in jail. I hope that stays. That's cool. I'm proud of America. There's cool things about America, but the financial aspect of it and the big government aspect of it, let's let it wither on the vine. The scariest thing we could do in the Bitcoin system is have it rapidly appreciate and leave all these people behind. Let's let it be as slow as possible. That's the best way. We can onboard more people. I can buy more Bitcoin if we don't go to $1 million tomorrow. It's like when it goes to $1 million, or even frankly, fucking now, it doesn't even make sense for me to buy Bitcoin. It's just like I'm not even chipping away at my cost value or whatever. So winners and losers always in financial systems. So let's have the world reserve currency, debt barons, be the losers. And if that means that I have to, be a little richer a little later, then like, so be it. I would take that. That's smash that button. Trade-off. I'd smash that button every day. And I understand why people don't feel that way, but I really think if they zoomed out and really thought about, what are the implications of the US government holding 5% of the supply and then, pumping Bitcoin up to, this is the most important time in geopolitical technocracy ever. Like, I really think that this is the most important time. And I think that's why we're seeing so much fucking insane shit. Drones fucking over things. LA's on fire. Trump's marching in and, COVID just happened. And it's like, we don't even remember these things. They just happen so fast. Like Trump was almost assassinated or whatever. It's like, it's hyper normalization up the fucking wazoo. We don't even remember what happened last week. And I think that's on purpose. It's sort of like, this is the phase shift. We're seeing guys running into Davos and, screaming about the free market and all this shit, and they're cheering it on. And it's like, well, aren't these the commies? Like, what's going on? This phase shift has happened so quickly. And I think the reason why is because we're moving to the deflationary age. We're moving out of this debt-based system to this deflationary model. Bitcoin is very important. I really do think that. And so, let's do it as slow as possible. What's going to happen next with AI and drones and techno warfare and, financial warfare has really been the weapon of choice, for a really long time. That will continue, but it's going to change. And we're going to see, really wild things happen as AI, grows up and, cryptocurrency grows up. And I think there's a reason why the czar, David Sachs, is both, because I think that they really do connect in a very interesting way. And, we're going to see an opportunity for the U.S. empire to extend, like arguably for the next 500 to 1,000 years because of what they do over the next 18 months. And that could very well be if they make Bitcoin the reserve asset of the world and are able to retain the dollar as the currency of the world, then they win. And that could be bad. And I don't really believe in multipolarity anymore. Like, I don't really believe in, Russia and China, because what did we learn at COVID? It was lockstep all across the fucking planet for the most part, right? Coordinated central banking, interest rate lowering, currency debasement, and then you can talk about pharmaceuticals, but I don't even care about that shit anymore. It's like the financial thing was really the interesting thing to me. And I think it's interesting that, in fall of 2019, Trump's meeting with Larry Fink, and they instigate this going direct plan where they figure out how to print trillions of dollars and basically give it to BlackRock. And they write out this whole plan before there's even a whisper of a virus or whatever. And then boom, the whole world, we crush demand. We do if you really look at lockdowns as sort of a financial weapon, and you look at the birth of the Bitcoin dollar sort of happening in that moment. And now we move forward. It's like the US empire may have just won for a really long time. So why do we have freedom advocates wanting to even increase those chances and accelerate those chances? I don't want that, frankly. And I know people in the States, again, I sympathize for it too, because he's fucking funny, I guess. But the Trump idea, the MAGA crew, it's like, I don't know. I fear so much about the technocracy that will come from this group of this PayPal Palantir presidency. Elon has moved into Mar-a-Lago. He's going to have a fucking, office at the White House. Like Bezos and Zuckerberg and Musk are going to be sitting at the inauguration together. Like, these are the baddies, 4 years ago. And now there are fucking libertarian free market champions that are going to bring free speech and freedom to the world. It's like they were the ones censoring everybody. What are we doing? Who made more money off of COVID than anyone? Those guys. Bezos fucking loved it. What are we doing? These guys embrace Bitcoin. The US dollar inflates into Bitcoin. They become fucking trillionaires. What the fuck? So yeah, that's my impassioned rant about why I think
great rant.
Yeah, thanks, man. I think it's just dangerous, and I don't have all the answers, and that's why I'm so desperately searching for fucking anything I can find to hold on to, because we are in this hyper normalization news cycle. It's really hard to, like, everybody just forgot about COVID. No one talks about lockdowns or anything, and it's like, well, that was a big deal. Will there be any retribution for it or any discussion, or are we just going to move on and go buy Greenland and go buy Mexico and like, what the hell are we doing? So I think it's worth like slow the brakes. Let's chill. Let's like breathe for a second. Bitcoin already hit 100K just like on this stuff. Like, we have a lot of capital to play with. If you're really a dissonant and you're really an exit and builder person who, believes the government isn't the solution, go find your own. It can be in technology. Technology's cool. But, let's slow things down and find what works for us and for the individual and build freedom tech. Because there's a lot of ways Bitcoin will monetize that doesn't increase freedom around the world. And I think we're accelerating that with the SBR. So that would be my rant. And I love the BPI guys, and I love David Bailey, and I think Dennis Porter's a nice guy, sure. I think the state level makes more sense than federal. But for the most part, I would say, like, think about what really are the second order effects of what you're doing. And, I spent a lot of time outside of the States. I did some time in Europe and South America. And I really like, Bitcoiners that aren't Americans right now. Like, they're really my people, because I think they're able to sort of see through the red, white, and blue shiny lights of, $1 million Bitcoin and all this stuff, and really think about, well, that doesn't benefit me. So, I really hope everybody just chills the fuck out and, breathes a little bit and enjoy the pump that's already happened, and, improve their lives on an individual level, and know that Donald Trump is not your savior. And, the government becoming a hedge fund is not, this beautiful thing. It's like actually kind of scary. So yeah, that would be my rant on the SBR. But
this episode is brought to you by Casa. For those of you out there who want to protect your Bitcoin, I want to tell you about Casa, the leading Bitcoin self-custody solution. If you're serious about protecting your Bitcoin, then you need a rock-solid security plan, and Casa gives you just that. With their multi-signature security and key management services, Casa makes it easier than ever to take control of your Bitcoin without the risk of a single point of failure. Casa also now has a private client option, which gives you a purpose-built security program with ongoing advisory, advanced verification inheritance, a 24/7 security emergency line, and lots more. To find out more about Casa's private client solution, go to casa.io, which is casa.io.
So the last thing I want to get on here, which is kind of a bit of a segue into your piece, is you put a tweet out a couple of days ago talking about the idea that Bitcoin was created by one of the intelligence agencies.
Sure.
Give us the deep dive on that, because that's something that I've heard a lot, and I give like an amount of credence to.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, just to be very clear, the first like 8 words of that, very long tweet thread were like, if you can't possibly maybe imagine that it's possible that maybe, it was essentially that Bitcoin came out of the intelligence Silicon Valley fintech arm of the United States, then check out this thread, so that the idea was sort of this, I don't know, it's become like blasphemy to talk about it. And it's funny, but like, this Bitcoin dollar stuff really started me kind of just like having fun at Bitcoin meetups and talking about this stuff with people. And then 3 years later or whatever, it's like a reality, and this stuff is really happening. So, but like, to me, it's like, how could you not have a discussion about that? I think it made sense years ago, and I think it makes even more sense as the U.S. government is just embracing it in this, like, it's a national security interest now of the United States that Bitcoin succeeds. Mm-hmm. That's weird. Why? If this is really competing with the U.S. dollar system, why would the U.S. like latch itself to Bitcoin even more at a legislative level, and perhaps at like a new financial system level, like a Bitcoin dollar situation? Why would they do this? Well, they knew that they were going to have to deal with this debt issue at some point. It's a little kind of crazy that the fucking Halloween 2008, after the start of like the biggest, volume wise anyway, the biggest debt crisis the U.S. has had yet. Obviously each one just innately mathematically is bigger because there's just more money. But we printed more money. It's funny. It doesn't even compare to what we did in COVID stuff. It was like, $300 billion. Like, oh no, this is, now
That
that's
was like a week in COVID.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we shipped that off to Ukraine and Israel and on a weekend or whatever. But, sorry, I'm not trying to demonetize you, but the expansion of the debt system, in 2008, really, the U.S. government. Well, let's roll it back. The setup is actually very similar to the COVID setup, right? We have this debt crisis, this financial issue that happens, and a bunch of money needs to be printed right as the parties are switching in the United States, which does this very funny thing. So in 2008, we have Bush leaving and we have Obama coming in. So the Democrats blame Bush and, the Republicans blame Obama. And there's really no one really gets held accountable for it. And what actually happens, we bail out the banks and the citizens get hurt. And after it was the banks and the financial firms that were doing all of these collateralized debt obligations and basically tokenizing mortgages and trading them around, and then the candle went the wrong way and these firms blow up. There's also a lot of evidence that it was a controlled demolition, but regardless, they're speculating and it blows up. And then all of a sudden, this random guy comes out of nowhere and releases a white paper on the cypherpunk mailing list right at the time where the U.S. is printing a bunch of money and the debt is becoming a runaway issue. It obviously was an issue before, but that was really the start of the runaway issue where people noticed. That was Occupy Wall Street. Obama came out of Occupy, which is very funny. No one really thinks about that, but there was a lot of civil unrest about what the banks and these asset managers and these, funds did. And they were able to kind of transmute it into this new hope and change movement that was just more of the same shit. Obama dropped more bombs than Bush and blah, blah, blah. Here we are. But Bitcoin comes out of that, which I think is very interesting, the timing of it, right? And then, of course, it's this hyperinflationary currency that's meant for drug dealers and sex traffickers and whatever the hell early Bitcoin is for. It's inflating at 50 Bitcoin every block. It's not the store of value thing. It's not really thought about that at all. Interestingly, as a personal note, I was working at a bar in San Francisco at that time, and in 2014, the guy that replaced Ross, and that was already after a halving, so it was down to 25. But the guy that replaced Ross, Silk Road 2.0, was a regular at my bar, Blake Menthal, and he taught me about Bitcoin. Literally, I didn't know that it could go up. He explained it to me that it was an anonymous digital currency that you could use to buy things online. And that's how I used it. And some blokes that I know put 50 Bitcoin up their nose, and and here we are. But and it wasn't until 2017, after another halving, that I see a headline and I see that, Bitcoin's crossed, 1,000, it was at the very start, maybe the end of 2016, start of 2017, it had crossed 1,000 again. And I was like, it can go up. Like, what do you, I had no idea that there was this value aspect. I don't know what I thought it was, but I didn't think that there was like a speculative, use case for it, because it was not really a good store of value, instrument yet, because it was still pretty inflationary. But as the halving cycles go on, 2017 was really the kind of wake up moment of like, oh shit, this thing can increase in value. And suddenly the use case turned from being like an online currency to this store of value thing. Obviously, I already explained the Bitcoin dollar 6 weeks before, the relative issuance goes below gold and the dollar in 2020. But there really was this sort of change. And I think it's really interesting to how, if you were the US government, what happened with the intelligence community? Well, in the war, and Operation Underworld was sort of the first merger of the intelligence state and like the mob, because the U.S. needed intelligence on who was at the ports and who was in the waters, basically back then when there weren't really satellites and data brokers and these things to get this information. So who do? You go to the fucking bootleggers, the traffickers, and the mob, because they know. So there was this merger of the intelligence state, which is obviously, she literally wrote the book on this, but One Nation Under Blackmail by Whitney Webb, the book starts with Operation Underworld because it is the perfect example of this. And once the intelligence community merged, with the mob, and begins to merge with Wall Street as well, because, hey, financial information gives you information gives you a hell of an edge in financial markets and speculation of oil, commodities, currencies, all these things. So you begin to see finance come into it. So now the intelligence community is just this fucking blob of, sure, the desk agents that work at the CIA and pocket protector bros and crunching numbers of, satellites and whatever. But now you're seeing this, marriage to the mob and to Wall Street. And as the microprocessor, era begins, and the conductor era, and we're starting to see computers start to happen, and the network state kind of start to happen. The intelligence community completely moves from being in an office at Langley or in the Pentagon, and it really moves into the private sector entirely, because it's just way more advantageous for them to do that. They don't have to deal with constitutional rights and spying on citizens. They're private companies. They can do whatever they want, obviously for the most part. So the intelligence community moves entirely into Silicon Valley, into these banks. And we start to see in the 70s this, after DARPA is established in 58 and they create the primordial internet stuff, we start to see, this stuff just starting to come out of Silicon Valley and Palo Alto and San Jose. And that has all of these connections and money and funding and grants and all of these things coming out of the CIA and the NSA and DARPA, but going into academia. That's really where it started in the 70s. Intelligence really took over academia, which I wrote this piece about, the Militarized Data Broker piece that talks about this program called the Massive Digital Data Systems Program that was the CIA, NSA, and DARPA. And they integrated into the computer science programs at Stanford, Caltech, MIT, Harvard, and Carnegie Mellon. And you look at Stanford specifically.
When you say they integrated, what are they doing? Are they looking for talent, or are they doing other things?
Well, yeah, they're looking for talent, but I think more so, quite literally, they put out this, and all this is unclassified, but they put out this briefing called the Birds of a Feather briefing in 93. Sorry, the briefing was 95. MDDS, the Massive Digital Data Systems, was 93. But the idea of the project was, hey, there's this architecture that needs to be built that has a national security interest. We understand where the internet is going. We created it. ARPA then became DARPA, and the ARPANET came out of, literally, Eisenhower founded ARPA because Russia launched Sputnik into space, and it had 4 radio fucking antennas on it, and they went, oh shit, they're beginning to, we need to go. So they found DARPA to basically compete. It came from this military angle, but as we found out, DARPA then basically infiltrates academia. And so they start this program where they distribute grants to basically build what they need for a modern digital data system, as they literally call it, Massive Digital Data Systems Project. And so they distribute funding to academia, to colleges, to, as it's outlined in this Birds of a Feather briefing, that we want these people that appear separate to all move towards the same thing, this birds of a feather idea. And we want them to build the system that we want, that we see basically taking over, the global internet. And so they fund all of these grants and all of these projects. And we see, direct funding from the NSA and the CIA and DARPA went to the Google boys who set up they used this grant that they got from this MDDS program through the NSF, the National Science Foundation, and this idea that they were like, we need to build this architecture to achieve, this is literally from the paper, to achieve what the intelligence community hoped for, right? So they're like, these things are really complex and they require, and tons amount of data, and we need to have all of these protocols that can query and index all of this data as we build out the modern internet and the modern surveillance system that can be built on the internet. So we need to find a way to query all of this and create searches and create a library on the internet. So 2 grants literally went to Sergey Brin and Larry Page while at Stanford from the NSA, the CIA, and DARPA, and they bought computers for these guys, and they built Google through CIA and NSA and DARPA funding. Now, Google isn't literally a DARPA project. Google didn't literally come out of the government or the intelligence community, but it did, right? But it didn't, because they were able to basically launder the direct connection through academia through this grant. And then when Google goes private and they incorporate, there's no actual direct connection, but all of the information and things that they built were encouraged, directly incentivized, and funded by grants from the intelligence community. And then they go out and they build Google. Google was funded literally by Andy Bechtolsheim, who was the funder of Sun Microsystems.
Just to go back a second.
Yeah, sure.
They're pushing money into the private sector to build the tools they want. But
first, Andy, they're putting it into academia to create the concepts that then go into the private sector to be built.
But is that because they want distance from those tools and they want it to appear like it's not just an intelligence asset? Or is it because they just think the private sector is going to do a better job of building those tools?
Well, it's a bit of the commercialization, for these products. They saw that Google had a commercial aspect. But you look at the top 7 or so 8 stocks in the US right now, what is the American economy? It's these projects. It's Google, It's Alphabet, it's Amazon. Jeff Bezos' grandfather was one of the co-founders of ARPA. You look at these huge companies, Tesla, SpaceX, Facebook, right? These are NVIDIA, these basically are the US economy. And they have all these direct connections that the mechanics and the protocol and the infrastructure came out of basically DARPA projects. So I think the reason why they did it was multi-step. I think there was a commercialization aspect that they thought was really important. That they were like, hey, we can do this better in the private sector. But I also think there was some laundering of where I think people would be really apprehensive about giving all of their information to Google if they knew it was a DARPA project, right? Would we be using Gmail if we were oh, this came out of the Pentagon? No, probably not. But if they do it through the guys at Sun Microsystems, they were basically the foil to, they're kind of not talked about very much, which is weird, but Microsoft went PC. They did the personal computer around the same time, and then Sun did all the network stuff. So Sun was like, hey, we actually think the future is not personal computation, it's going to be network computation. You're not even going to do computation on your computer at home. You're going to connect to some sort of network, and the computation will be done elsewhere. Very ahead of its time, very smart. But the Sun in Sun Microsystems stands for Stanford University Network. So they were all Stanford guys that were connected to this project. Andy Bechtolsheim was the seed funder of Google, along with this guy, David Sheraton. These 2 guys, they gave Sergey Brin and Larry technically their first money. I think it was $100K each, and then they go and form Google. Eric Schmidt, who becomes the kind of famous CEO of Google, was the former CTO of Sun Microsystems. So it kind of they build all of the, kind of more important than building the personal computer is building the infrastructure, the hardware, the Ethernet stuff for the internet. And these guys built that with influence, directly from the intelligence community. And I think this idea of this birds of a feather briefing was to sort of be like, hey, this is where we want to go. We know this is the future. So how do we get there? If we just come out and say DARPA is building the internet and we're doing this and it's from the U.S. military and we're going to create search engines and email and video streaming and an internet library, no one's going to touch that shit. Of course not, because they're trained to know, okay, military bad, intelligence community bad. I'm not going to put any personal information in Google or whatever. But by doing it in this way, they're able to build out these things with government funding, knowing that it's of national security to be ahead of basically the whole technical community of the earth, but do it in a way that makes it seem like, oh, these young guys just came up with this cool idea, and then Google came out and it's so fun, and they have ping pong tables and they have like chefs, and it's like so fun. It's like, no, these are like heavily important national security companies to the United States. And I think an interesting angle of that is Facebook, right? I mean,
This was a really interesting part of the piece to me, because it hadn't clicked to me in this way before. But I know there were social media sites before Facebook, but Facebook was probably the first one where, I mean, what, 80% of the world or something crazy like that's on Facebook, and everyone's put in a ton of personal information, and you're trying to pull a tie between that and, again, intelligence agencies. And the really interesting one in there with me, so I didn't know very much about Sean Parker at all. I thought he was like this cypherpunk guy who created Napster. I never used Napster, but I used things like LimeWire and Kazaa, and I always thought he was this like cool guy. But you write in the piece, right, that he got his first, was it a CIA project when he was 16?
Well, this is what's so funny is he probably was this cool guy. Like, he was just this kid who was like hacking into like banking systems and doing all of this fun stuff when he was like 14, 15 years old. That's cool, right? But the CIA knocks on his door and they're like, hey, hacking is kind of this amazing recruitment, outlet for intelligence agencies, because it's like, you fucking hack into this thing, that pings up all of these, red alerts and all these systems, and they come and knock on your door. And that's literally what happened with Sean Parker. And he had his first contact with the CIA at 16, and he literally wasn't even finishing his senior year of high school when he was just working for intelligence firms and coding things. And I think another really interesting thing about, and I don't even talk about this in the piece, but imagine you want to build a surveillance system. You want to build a panopticon using the internet. A technical chokehold of that would be if you weren't exchanging files or streaming or doing anything online, but you had a microphone in your computer that was recording you and broadcasting everything to the Pentagon, you would be able to see that traffic, on the internet. You would be able to see those packets being sent, and you would be like, why do I have an upload of 8 gigabytes or whatever from my laptop over the last 8 months? That's very strange. But if you create peer-to-peer file transfer networks, BitTorrent, which was Bram Cohen, which worked on this idea of swarming that was actually invented by Jed McCaleb, who founded Mt. Gox and Stellar and a bunch of other things. But he came up with this idea with eDonkey 2000. You actually have to create a lot of data being moved around on the internet to basically launder and hide surveillance data being sent around on the fiber optic cables and the satellites and the broadband of the internet. So it's kind of funny that they catch this guy, hacking, and then they basically groom him and bring him into the intelligence community. And then he comes out and creates Napster, which before Napster, there was basically no peer-to-peer connectivity at all. And then, they work on this way to compress sound into these, it was a data compression algorithm first and foremost. That's what MP3 was. And then they were able to send files back and forth. And then, we get Kazaa and everything else. And then it's movies. And then it gets to BitTorrent. And BitTorrent is like over 50% of web traffic. It's something crazy like that. It's just everybody is sending all of these things peer-to-peer. So now all of a sudden, it's really hard to tell what data is coming from your devices and what your internet service provider is.
So do you believe that's happening, though?
Yeah.
That it's like laundering other information?
Yeah, of course. 100%. I think we learned a lot in the Snowden leaks, through this Project Muscular and Project Prism of, so basically what we found in these two projects that's so disturbing to me is I'm sorry, everybody, I forget which one is which, but there's Prism and Muscular and MUSCLR. And one of them is a project that says the Yahoo and Google and these data brokers basically have a direct contact with the NSA. And if the NSA needs any information on anyone, they can just send, they don't need a warrant, and they can just send a request to Yahoo or Google, and they will send information back on the user. So they've established that there's this way that if they want to go get information on you, they can go talk to these big companies, Facebook, and they can get the information right back. But the other side of the leak was they're actually directly taking information in packet form from fiber optic cables before they even get to the data brokers. So they have an ability to warrantlessly take your information from data brokers, but there's a paper trail. But they can just glean that very same information directly from the packets coming in the fiber optic cables, and they elect to do that instead. Well, why? Well, because there's no paper trail. So they've already created this axiom where you can see why intelligence, operatives don't want to have any sort of, they don't want to, have a paper trail where they're maybe pushing constitutional, buttons that they don't want to push. But if they just take data packets directly from the source, so it's interesting that they have both of these, of these programs, but one is a lot scarier than the other. We all kind of know that if law enforcement wants to work with Google or Apple or Facebook, like there's things that they can get from these private companies, but it's very scary to me that intelligence is just peeling packets directly from, the spigot and being able to do their own heuristic analysis on it, directly. That to me is much scarier. But none of that would all be very easy to see if there wasn't massive amounts of data being thrown around. So you kind of need file sharing to sort of be, being a huge part of the internet for that to work. And it's interesting that Sean Parker, was connected to, he was the one that connected Peter Thiel, who was the first serious investor in Facebook, to Zuckerberg, because he already is super, dabbed up with the intelligence community. His handler basically is this guy, Ron Conway, who runs SV Angel, who's like all over the crypto space. But he was also a big early investor there. And the thing with Facebook is really crazy is that it came out of an MDDS university, the same massive digital data systems program. There's no direct ties that Facebook was actually given any grants from this, but Harvard was in this program. And Facebook, if you really look at it, it's the first digital ID. It really was the first system that set up, but we built it. That's the thing that's so fucked up. There's no, that no one needs a warrant if you're literally posting a picture of your face and where you are and what you're doing and how tall you are and what your religion is and who your friends are. And you're literally tagging their fucking face in a box so the AI can then scan and learn, where they're going. They know where we're going, kind of decades in advance. And I don't know exactly who they is, but intelligence communities know where they want us to go, this birds of a feather concept. So they build these systems that incentivize us to give them the things that they want. And Facebook, very interestingly, it was founded officially the day that this DARPA program shuttered, the exact same day, which was called LifeLog. And the architect and project manager at DARPA at that project worked with Facebook. So anyway, sorry.
This episode is brought to you by Ledger. If you're serious about protecting your Bitcoin, Ledger has the solution you need. Their hardware wallets give you complete control over your private keys, ensuring that your Bitcoin stays safe from hacks, phishing, and malware. With Ledger's easy-to-use devices and the Ledger Live app, managing your Bitcoin has never been more convenient. Whether you're a long-time holder or new to the world of Bitcoin, Ledger makes it simple to keep your assets protected. If you want to find out more, visit ledger.com and secure your Bitcoin today. That is ledger.com.
Sorry, I interrupt you there, but I want to jump in because this was a really interesting tie to me because, like you say in the piece, it was launched the day that LifeLog closed down. And it feels like you're kind of hinting at some Zuckerberg involvement with the intelligence community. And I want to know what you're trying to hint at there.
Well, if you want to create basically this financial system that's online and you want to create this sort of technocracy panopticon kind of system and extend US empire, understanding we have debt problems, but we have a huge technological advantage. How do you get people to onboard themselves onto the system? You create something with Facebook where you create this exclusivity, using literally like edu emails. And it was really cool to be on Facebook. Like, I mean, me, I'm tinfoil hat all the way, but I had a Facebook. I did all, I haven't had it for over a decade and deleted the shit out of it, but I put a lot of shit out there. There's a lot of information. You can find pictures of my grandmother's face on there and all these things, right? Like I did the whole shebang. You create all of these networks of webs of friends of what they're into and all this stuff. And like we really built that. If you know artificial intelligence is coming, you know that a digital system is coming where you need ID. How do you basically manufacture consent for it? You build this hip, fun, exclusive thing aimed at the next generation of ever online people. You can't, again, if the fucking Pentagon came out and said, we're starting a social network, we would all laugh and not do it. But if they create this really awesome narrative of this really nerdy guy who does this thing, and then we all go see the social network and we're like, oh my God, like the 9 Inch Nails guy did the soundtrack and it's so cool. But it's like, it's kind of horseshit and it's not really real, but they've manufactured this unbelievable dialectic for us to give all of our information away to the public, that they don't need warrants to build all of these things. And they can, the user base of Facebook is insane. That was really the thing that got brought up during the Libra hearings when Facebook went to start its own digital currency with David Marcus, who now is doing Lightspark. The big issue was like, we don't really care about all these altcoins. Like, we don't really give a shit. There's no network effect. And we know no one can compete with the network effect of the dollar. But Facebook has so many active users every month that you actually kind of could compete with us. It's a payment system, and that's actually scary to us. Again, so they claim. And so Facebook, I think you could argue in a lot of ways. There's so many connections to the intelligence community there. And what is the outcome of Facebook? It's basically manufactured consent for the first digital ID, which is just an absolute necessity for the coming digital economy. So we're not really that, how do people sign into websites? They use their Google ID, they use their Facebook ID, maybe they even use PayPal, for paying for things. And it's like we've really centralized our ID to these like really specific Silicon Valley based fintech companies that all actually do have direct ties to the surveillance state. I think it's a little concerning. And again, you could argue, I think it's decently clear that there's a military origin to Facebook. And there's an amazing Whitney Webb piece about that called The Military Origins of Facebook that really breaks a lot of this stuff down even further. But you look at, what Palantir is. It's basically the modern CIA. There's this really funny Reddit Ask Me Anything with Peter Thiel, where they ask, like, is Palantir, like a CIA front? And he responded, no, the CIA is a front for Palantir. Of course, he's being kind of tongue in cheek, but like, they really are the modern data broker, of the world, and they can do so much more as a private sector entity than they ever could as a public sector. And you look at the founding of Palantir; it started in PayPal. It was the anti-fraud algorithm at PayPal. When you make digital money, which they were really the first people to do it successfully in any way, the biggest issues are mitigating fraud on your systems. So Max Levchin, who was the CTO of PayPal, spent all of this time coming up with like CAPTCHA and these like different tests. Like the first, commercial application for CAPTCHA was PayPal, and all these ways to mitigate fraud. Then it became incredibly complex, and they're using all these modeling systems to, figure out, who's committing fraud and who's not, because that was their only loss. It was just printing money other than fraud, and it became this huge problem. Infamously, there was this Russian fraudster who just kept like tickling their nuts, named Igor, and so they named the anti-fraud algorithm after him, and they finally kind of defeated his criminal activity. But they had in the process, they had created this like really robust anti-fraud algorithm. So Thiel then works with Alex Karp and is literally mentored by John Pondexter, who is a DARPA, employee who's running this program called Total Information Awareness, which had kind of come out of it came out of sort of Patriot Act era post 9/11. They ended up rebranding to terrorist awareness or terrorist information awareness because they were trying to like really play that. Well, it's okay if we're spying on terrorists, right? But they knew that they wouldn't be able to do this DARPA project, so they basically took the Igor algorithm and made a privatized cutout of TIA that was literally directly advised, monitored, mentored by the guy that was leading the TIA at DARPA. And the first investors of Palantir was In-Q-Tel, was the CIA, and they were their first customers for a super long time. Now they kind of do like everything, they do all intelligence people, and every branch of the U.S. government, sort of has some connection to Palantir now. It's kind of insane. They even have a Palantir Metropolis, which is like hedge funds and banks. And there was this really cool quote that I found from The Guardian that's like, Palantir does not just provide the Pentagon with a machine for global surveillance and the data efficient fighting of war, it runs Wall Street too, which is really insane of a quote.
I put that quote in my prep.
Oh yeah, fuck yeah, dude. Yeah, it's wild. So, but Palantir really was it's the most clear paper trail of a privatized version of a DARPA project getting pushed out because there was direct scrutiny from people in the government pushing back on this totally insane project. Total information awareness. Like, what are we talking about? Even like, adversarial, senators could look at that and be like, something's wrong here. And they attempted to rebrand with this whole terrorist thing, but they knew something was wrong. But if we give it a funny name from the Lord of the Rings and we push it into the private sector, it'll be totally fine. And then Thiel takes over and puts some money in with Founders Fund, who Sean Parker later joined, Thiel's firm Founders Fund, and you see this sort of privatization of the data brokers that were used to be directly at the DARPA and at the DoD, at the Pentagon, at the CIA, at the NSA, and you just see the tentacles sort of spread out into Silicon Valley and into the private sector for like basically every reason. They can now sell stock of it. They can make a ton of money. They don't have to worry about constitutional, pushbacks of what a public sector company can do versus a private. There's a ton of reasons why they would want to do this. And then I think this question started of Bitcoin coming from intelligence, but you start to see, well, what's the outcome? And the outcome now is that the U.S. Private sector is so far ahead of everybody else in the world from a software and frankly a hardware standpoint. Even though a lot of it gets made outside of the U.S., it's like patented and made by U.S. engineers, basically. And we see this huge technological edge and advantage as we're entering the AI era. You want to have useful AI models, you need to feed it real data. When you feed AI stuff generated from AI, it literally creates a feedback of just garbage. Like it can't learn against itself. It needs human information to learn. And so how do you create a cache big enough for the AI to learn? Well, you fucking surveil everybody, and then you incentivize everybody to upload pictures of the grandma and then tag the little facial part or whatever and all these photos, and then they can triangulate everything, and then they can kind of feed their thing. So it's a little scary when you present it that way,
it's
right?
Very scary.
Right. But when you present it as like, oh, look at this fucking Zuckerberg guy, he's so cool and he started this company, it's like fun and it's easy and no red flags pop up. But when you look at this MDDS program and you look at all of these things, you see the outcome, you can see why the US government did it. Now we go back to the first question you asked, I think 45 minutes ago. Did Bitcoin come out of the U.S. intelligence state? Well, now we've kind of described what the U.S. intelligence state is. It's a fucking mess. It's a mess of private sector grants for academic, and it's a shit show of what it actually is. Well, Bitcoin probably came out of that. Does that mean it directly came out of a dossier written by someone at the Pentagon? I don't think so. But did it probably come out of the fintech scene in Northern California? Extremely likely. And when you look at the early Bitcoin scene, you see so many connections to PayPal and that PayPal group. You see that group embracing Bitcoin in a huge way and ready to take advantage of the incoming Bitcoin system. And quite literally, the first motto of PayPal was a new world currency. And as David Sachs said in an interview in 2017, he said, where PayPal failed at creating a new world currency, Bitcoin succeeded, which I think is very telling. There's also this great book, Digital Gold, by Nathaniel Popper, and in that book, there's a Voorhees quote where he talks about my pet theory for Satoshi was that it was created at this fintech firm when they were asked to go make a digital currency, and then basically the management of the company was like, this is way too crazy, we can't release this, we have to do it anonymously, and then they did. And then when you see the way that PayPal was basically sucked up by the intelligence state, as Levchin says specifically, when I was making the algorithms at PayPal, I worked with every 3 and 4 letter agency, and it was some of the most fruitful business relationships I ever had. He really controversially said that on Charlie Rose and was very upset that people were pissy about the NSA, post 9/11 spying on people. He was like, no, the NSA is sick. Like, they protect us. Like, why would we not want to work with them? I applied for the NSA and they wouldn't let me work for them because I wasn't a citizen yet. And when I applied for them, they told me, you'll never make a money doing this. If you're here to apply cryptography for the benefit of the United States, don't do it in the public sector. You'll never make a dime. Then he gets sent to Northern California, meets Peter Thiel. They fund PayPal after breakfast. David Sachs joins, the incoming crypto czar. Thiel then, basically takes over the CIA. And here we are, right? So I think that there's a lot of connections. You could see the dialectic, basically, of how do we launder where this stuff is coming from? How do we launder who gets to take advantage of it? We'll set it all up as this, it's this fraudulent system for criminals and all this stuff. But then, 14 years later, it's of a national security. And it's kind of similar to what Tether did. Oh, it's Chinese paper, it's fraud, it's this. Oh, wait, actually, now it's the biggest buyer of US debt. Extremely similar. You start to look at all these PayPal ties and this sort of, I call it the San Jose project. And you begin to see sort of a through line of maybe there's something to this blob. But, I'm just a guy with an internet account. Like, I don't know. And I'm just untangling this stuff myself. And I don't even know if it really matters. Does it matter if it came out of U.S. government? I don't know. It is what it is, right? It is. I think it's clearly an invention, not a discovery, but it also is the math. It is what it is. At the end of the day, it's a very active game. And if it was the U.S., they had to have been really damn sure about being able to control. It's a misnomer to say Bitcoin is decentralized from a consensus standpoint, in the sense that really all it does is distribute consensus to the layers that Bitcoin consensus is run on. So that's hardware, internet service providers. There's these kind of choke points at which, well, if the U.S. government or some entity owned every ISP in the world, then there would be choke points of if this thing was really, a permissionless system. If someone owned all of the, silicon production in the world, and you couldn't make chips or make hard drives or processors, without going through one company, then it doesn't really matter that there's this distributed consensus, because the thing that runs the distributed consensus is centralized, right? I don't think that's the case. I don't think we're at that point. But the U.S., if they did put this out, if it was a government intelligence operation, they were extremely confident that they would be able to control the Pandora's box that got open. So I think that is of concern a little bit if you do decide to choose this narrative. I would like people to consider all of these things, but then think about what they can fucking do about it. And again, I go back to Bitcoin has been amazing to me. It's given me an amazing opportunity. And I don't care if it was literally created at a meeting in the Pentagon, because what it did for my life has been very good. And I know that I can, through the right education and things, give that same opportunity to my brothers or, children or whatever. Right. So there's a great opportunity regardless of its incubation. What's more important is where it's going. And so to tie this all back into SBR and the tetherification and dollarization of Bitcoin, it's like, where are we going? Where is Bitcoin going? We should be really aware of where it's going and really careful about where we push it, because number go up is not just the end game here. There's so many other pieces that are so much more important. Like money is a means to an end. Yeah, it's cool to have more means from more ends. But really, money should be something that gives you your time back and gives you freedom to be able to go live life. Like, you could be a billionaire and you spend 23 hours a day staring at a chart. That's a shitty life. What's the fucking point of that? Go do stupid things. Go eat mushrooms. Go do some bullshit thing and buy a pool and have a party and do whatever the fuck it is. Use your Bitcoin and your funds to do fun stuff. Buy a mountain bike. Go fly to fucking Cambodia. Like, I don't know. Go do shit. Go see the world. I don't think humans were meant to just be these hyper speculative 8,000 monitors around them and trading fart coin and doing all this stuff. Bitcoiners are no better than that when they do that same thing. There's no just it's not this transmutation thing that makes you a better person because you made $1 million off Bitcoin versus the guy that made $1 million off XRP. It's the same fucking thing if we allow it to go to the same place, which is that it's just a speculation tool and it doesn't bring freedom to the world in a way. There's no difference. So let's just be careful of where it's going. And, let's try to increase accessibility to UTXO ownership and, maybe think about some scalability stuff, and let's reject the dollar because we have a chance here. Like, that's the fun thing about this, is we do have a chance to attack the dollar system here, and minimize this chokehold that the U.S. empire has on the world. So why would we encourage the opposite when we have a chance? If the beast shows you its neck, you fucking better not miss. And right now, not only are we missing, we're like, hey, over here. Like, I'm over here with the fucking javelin. Like, look at me. And it's going to eat us, So let's not get eaten. Let's fucking stab it in the neck.
I can't think of a better way to end this, Mark. That was fucking brilliant. I hope a lot of people listen to this and pay attention. Where do you want to send anyone before we close out?
Yeah, sure. I'm kind of just floating around a little bit right now. I'm working on this chain series, turning it into a book with my co-author, Whitney Webb. And right now I'm working, writing for her website, Unlimited Hangout. So this piece, the data broker piece, will be out tomorrow, or rather, I think today, depending on where you are in the future watching this. But yeah, Unlimited Hangout. And then I'm on Twitter at markgoodw_in. Yeah, stay free.
Appreciate you, Mark. That was great. Thank you.